A cruel shove sent a trembling girl crashing into the mud. A ragged toy clutched tightly in her arms, as if it could shield her from the world. Street rats are worth more sold than saved. The man sneered, his boots splattering dirt across her pale face. But before another blow could fall, a calm yet furious voice cut through the storm. Alexander Carter, the millionaire single dad, stepped forward, his gaze burning with authority. "Touch her again," he warned, "and you'll regret it." The rain lashed against the glittering coastline of Monaco, turning the harbor lights into golden streaks trembling on the water. Waves crashed with relentless force, echoing the chaos above. In this city of glamour and wealth where luxury reigned supreme, no one chose to walk in such a storm. But one small figure had no choice. She was already running from hunger, fear, and loneliness. Sophia was only 7, but already hunger had carved lessons into her life that no child should know. Barefoot, her thin legs splashed through the flooded alleys, her soaked dress clinging like a second skin. The rain showed no mercy, turning every cobblestone into a river and every shadow into a threat. She clutched a ragged toy rabbit against her chest, the last piece of comfort from a past she could hardly remember. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating her wide eyes filled with desperation, framed by strands of hair plastered to her cheeks. She didn't know where she was going, she only knew she had to keep moving. The men who had chased her earlier had given up, their laughter fading into the storm, but the fear remained, pressing against her chest with every breath. Tonight she wasn't just running from them, she was running from loneliness itself. On the hill above the marina, the Carter estate rose like a fortress of glass and stone. Its walls glowed faintly under the sweep of security lights, the mansion looming with a kind of quiet command. For most it was untouchable, another monument to wealth in a city where the Mediterranean glittered beneath luxury yachts and champagne parties. But for Sophia it looked like salvation, the only place left to hide from the storm. She squeezed through a narrow gap in the iron fence, scraping her arms against the cold metal. Her small figure vanished into the manicured hedges, branches bending beneath the weight of the rain. She crouched behind a rose bush, breath fogging in the chilled air, too frightened to move. She might have stayed hidden until dawn if not for the low hum of an engine drifting through the storm. A sleek black car rolled slowly up the drive, its surface gleaming even under sheets of rain. The headlights washed across the driveway, and inside sat Alexander Carter. At 45, Alexander was a man whose name carried power across continents. A millionaire known for his sharp business instincts, he had built an empire from London to Hong Kong. People called him disciplined, unshakable, brilliant. Yet beneath the polished surface of his success, he lived a life wrapped in silence. His mansion was filled with art and marble but empty of laughter. He was a single dad, raising his young son with every ounce of responsibility he could muster. Yet even with his child, the echo of loneliness lingered. He had given the world everything in business but had never found connection beyond the walls of his estate. As the car came to a stop, Alexander stepped out, adjusting his coat against the storm. His mind was already turning to reports he needed to review before tomorrow's meeting in Geneva. But then a small voice rose through the rain. "Sir, may I sleep in your dog's house tonight?" He froze, convinced for a moment that the storm was playing tricks on him. Slowly his eyes scanned the shadows until they found her, a tiny figure drenched to the bone, trembling under the rain. She stood no taller than his waist, her lips quivering as she spoke again. "I'll be quiet," she whispered quickly, as though afraid he might scold her. "Just until the storm passes." Alexander blinked, utterly unprepared. He had spent years negotiating million-dollar contracts, facing ruthless rivals without flinching. Yet here he was, undone by the fragile voice of a child. He had no dog, of course. He had never even considered one. Pets seemed messy, unpredictable, a complication he had no room for. But she didn't know that. To her, even a doghouse would be safer than the streets. He stared at her longer than he meant to, memories flickering from a childhood he rarely let himself revisit. The thought of a 7-year-old braving the night alone hit him with startling force. The storm seemed to fall silent for a moment, leaving only the quiet space between them. "You can't stay out here," he said finally, his voice firmer than he expected. The girl lowered her gaze to the puddles at her feet, I won't make a mess. The garden is fine. Something twisted inside his chest, an ache he couldn't quite name. What's your name? He asked. Sophia, she whispered. He crouched so his eyes met her. Up close he saw the scratches on her arms, the mud caked across her hands, and the way her shoulders shook beneath the soaked fabric of her dress. But it was her eyes that struck him most. Dark, wide, filled with fear and yet with a desperate flicker of hope, far too old for her face. Sophia, he repeated slowly, testing the sound. I can't let you sleep outside. Come in, at least until you're warm. Her eyes widened, as though she had misheard him. Inside, she breathed, disbelief coloring her voice. Yes, inside. He opened the heavy front door, light spilling onto the stone steps. For years those doors had welcomed only colleagues and associates, never someone like this. Now they stood open for a child who had asked for nothing more than a corner of shelter. She hesitated, glancing at her dripping clothes, then back at him. I'll get everything dirty. Furniture can be cleaned, he said, surprising even himself with the ease of the words. Slowly, cautiously, Sophia stepped across the threshold. Her wet feet left faint prints on the marble floor, each one a quiet declaration that something had shifted. She lifted her gaze to the glittering chandelier above the staircase, her mouth parting in wonder. For a moment she seemed to forget her fear, lost in the sight of a world she had never known. Alexander watched her, a strange mixture of pride and shame rising inside him. He had built this palace to showcase his achievements, to remind the world of his strength. Yet tonight it had never looked so different, until he saw it through her eyes. My name is Alexander, he said, closing the door gently behind them. You're safe here tonight. Sophia hugged her rabbit closer, nodding as her wet hair clung to her cheeks. She didn't thank him. Perhaps she didn't trust yet that she wouldn't be cast out. But in her silence, Alexander felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. He didn't know why this moment mattered so deeply, only that it did. His life had shifted, as surely as the storm breaking against Monaco's coast. The storm raged outside, but within the Carter estate a fragile calm began to bloom, one neither the child nor the millionaire's single dad fully understood. Sophia stood just inside the doorway, dripping onto polished marble, hesitant to take another step. The scent of polished wood and faint cologne filled the air, so unlike the mildew and smoke that clung to her own clothes. Alexander removed his coat and set it aside, his gaze fixed on the girl. He wasn't impatient or annoyed, but cautious, curious. Come, he said, his tone steady, softened by something unfamiliar even to himself. He guided her through the grand hall, past paintings worth more than entire homes, past velvet drapes that muted the storm's roar. Sophia trailed behind, her fingers brushing the walls as if she needed to prove the house was real. He opened a guest bathroom door, and Sophia gasped. Marble stretched from floor to ceiling, reflecting light from a chandelier overhead. A bathtub, large enough to be a pool in her eyes, was filling with steaming water as Alexander turned the handles. The rushing sound made her pause, not because she hadn't heard water before, but because here it meant safety, comfort. Warm water, she whispered, almost as if she feared the words themselves would vanish. Alexander noticed her hesitation. He retrieved soft towels, setting them neatly beside the tub. It's for you, he said simply. Her eyes widened. For me? He nodded. A bath will help. You'll feel warm again. Her lips trembled with protest, but she stepped forward cautiously, her small hand resting on the marble rim, as though the tub might disappear. Steam curled around her fingers, and for the first time that night, she smiled faintly. Alexander excused himself, leaving the door slightly ajar so she wouldn't feel trapped. Alone in the hallway, he leaned against the wall, surprised by how deeply her quiet wonder touched him. This house had been designed to impress, to remind others of his success, but tonight it had been repurposed to offer a child her first true taste of comfort. When Sophia emerged, wrapped in a towel that nearly swallowed her whole, she looked transformed. Damp waves of hair clung to her cheeks, her skin flushed with warmth. She held the towel tightly, eyes darting nervously as though unsure what would happen next. Alexander offered her one of his plain white shirts, far too large for her small frame. She slipped into it carefully, smoothing the fabric as though it were silk. You must be hungry, he said. She nodded, though she didn't speak. The faint rumble of her stomach was answer enough. In the kitchen, the refrigerator glowed with delicacies, caviar, imported cheeses, bottles of wine worth thousands. None of it seemed right. After a pause he chose something simpler, heating milk whisking in chocolate until it frothed. He placed a plate of cookies on the counter. The rich smell filled the room. Sophia sat at the edge of a tall chair, her legs dangling. When he set the mug in front of her, she hesitated, holding it with both hands as if afraid it would vanish. The first sip made her eyes flutter closed, and when she opened them again tears shimmered. "It's too good," she whispered, voice breaking. Alexander felt a sharp ache in his chest. He watched silently as she nibbled each cookie slowly, though he noticed her slip one into her pocket when she thought he wasn't looking. Old instincts of survival. He didn't stop. Instead he felt a quiet sorrow for how much she had endured already. When her eyelids began to sag with exhaustion, she asked timidly, "Can I sleep on the couch? I promise I won't make a mess." Alexander's heart clenched. She wasn't demanding a bed, only permission to exist within his walls. "You'll sleep in the guest room," he said firmly, leaving no room for argument. Her eyes widened in disbelief, as if he had offered her a palace. He led her up the staircase to a rarely used room. The bed stretched vast, covered in white linen that glowed faintly in the lamplight. Sophia froze at the doorway, whispering, "It's too big." "It's yours tonight," Alexander replied. He adjusted pillows awkwardly, fumbling in a way that betrayed how long it had been since he had cared for anyone but his own child. She climbed onto the bed, nearly disappearing beneath the blanket, clutching her toy rabbit clothes. As he turned off the light, leaving only a soft lamp glowing, her voice drifted through the darkness. "Thank you, Mr. Alexander." He paused. Gratitude from a child with nothing struck him harder than any accolade he had ever received. He closed the door gently, footsteps echoing down the silent hall. That night, in his study, Alexander sat surrounded by contracts and financial reports, but his focus was gone. His thoughts returned again and again to the small figure asleep in the guest room. Something about her presence unsettled the fortress of solitude he had built around himself. It wasn't pity, it was something heavier, something more personal. For the first time in years he wondered if his life of wealth and routine had ever truly been enough. Down the hall Sophia slept more soundly than she had in months. No dreams of hunger, no shivering against cold stone floors. Tonight she dreamed of warmth, of a voice that had not turned her away, of a home that might even for one night hold a place for her. The storm outside began to soften, its rhythm fading into quiet. Within that rhythm lay the fragile beginning of a bond neither expected. When morning came, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the estate, painting marble floors with gold. Sophia awoke in a bed so soft she thought she might still be dreaming. She stretched beneath heavy blankets, blinking at the light, disoriented by comfort itself. The bath, the food, the towering bed, it all seemed impossible. Hugging her rabbit close, she whispered to it as though needing reassurance. Downstairs, Alexander sat at the long dining table, a newspaper folded beside his coffee. Yet his eyes weren't on the print. They drifted toward the hall waiting. When Sophia appeared, wearing the oversized shirt he had given her, her hair brushed neatly, he felt something stir inside him. The house no longer felt so cavernous, so empty. Breakfast was simple: eggs, toast, fresh fruit. Sophia ate quietly, her posture tense, carefully saving bits of bread at the edge of her plate. Invisible wounds, Alexander thought, linger in the smallest gestures. Later that morning, he spoke gently but firmly. "You need proper clothes, we'll go together." She blinked in uncertainty, but when he added, "Just a few things," she nodded. The sleek black car carried them toward Milan, gliding along sunlit roads. Sophia pressed her face against the glass, eyes wide at the sight of shop windows, busy cafes, and cathedral spires reaching into the sky. For her, the world was opening. In Milan the city pulsed with energy, fashion, elegance, the hum of life spilling through every street. Sophia clung close to Alexander as they entered a clothing store, her small frame overwhelmed by rows of colors and textures she had never imagined. She picked the simplest items she could find, tugging at his sleeve to show him a plain dress and a pair of jeans. "These are enough, Mr. Alexander," she whispered. "You don't have to spend so much." He studied her face, then rested a hand gently on her shoulder.
Sophia, you deserve more than enough. She blinked at him, uncertain, but his words planted a seed of belief she had never known. Yet just as warmth began to grow, shadows from her past reappeared. As they neared the register, Sophia's body stiffened, her small hand clutched his arm with sudden strength. Alexander followed her gaze through the glass doors. 3 men leaned against a wall, their eyes locked on her. "It's them," she whispered, her voice trembling. The men began to move. Alexander's protective instincts surged instantly, drawing Sophia close. He stepped outside. His presence was tall, commanding, and immovable. The largest man, bearded and grinning with menace, sneered. "Looks like you found our little friend. Been following her? She belongs to us," another added, spitting on the ground. "Not about bread, it's about respect. She owes us." Alexander's voice cut through the air, sharp as steel. "She's a child. You will not come near her again." The men laughed, loud and mocking. Passers-by glanced, then quickly looked away, pretending not to see. In that instant, Alexander understood. His wealth, his reputation, his empire meant nothing here. This was a world ruled by intimidation, where a frightened girl could vanish without a trace. Sophia's fingers dug into his sleeve, her entire body trembling. The men closed in. "We can make her disappear," the bearded one said coldly. "Unless you make it worth our while." Extortion, thinly veiled as menace. Alexander reached for his wallet, not because he believed money would solve anything, but because he needed time. He handed over a thick roll of bills, his eyes hard. "Take this, and never return." The men accepted, but their smiles only grew sharp. "Money won't change what she is," one of them hissed. "Street rats always crawl back." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Alexander felt her fear sink into his bones. He guided her quickly into the car, locking the doors with a snap. As the engine roared to life, Sophia buried her face against his arm. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They never stop." Back at the estate, silence hung heavy. Alexander poured her a glass of water, his hand steady though his mind raced. He knew these men would not vanish. They would wait, circling, testing his resolve. That evening, a knock at the door brought a new visitor. Clara Rossi, a social worker from Naples, had come after reports of a child seen at the Carter estate. She was a woman with kind eyes and a voice tempered by years of hearing too many stories like Sophia's. "Where did she come from?" Clara asked softly. "What are your intentions, Mr. Carter?" Before Alexander could answer, Sophia clung to his arm. "He takes care of me," she pleaded. "Please don't send me back." Clara listened, her pen pausing mid-sentence. She explained the procedures, the need for documentation, the machinery of law that turned slowly and often without compassion. Later that night, Evelyn Carter arrived unannounced. His sister swept into the mansion like a storm, her words sharper than the wind outside. "Alexander, what madness is this? A child from the streets? Do you realize the scandal this could bring?" Her accusations struck him harder than the threats in Milan. To Evelyn, everything was about legacy, the family name, the empire they had built. "Let social services handle it," she urged. "Protect what we've created." But when Alexander looked at Sophia curled against the couch, her eyes wide with terror at the thought of being taken away, he knew his choice had already been made. The streets had scarred her, but he would not allow them to reclaim her. The following days were uneasy. Alexander tightened security around the estate, but Sophia still jumped at every passing car, every sudden noise. Shadows did not vanish simply because you closed a door. One afternoon, while Alexander met with legal advisors about guardianship, Clara persuaded him to let Sophia accompany her to a routine medical checkup. Sophia, eager for something that resembled normal life, convinced him with a timid smile. "It's only a checkup," she said. "I'll be fine." But hours later, his phone rang. Clara's trembling voice shattered his world. "Alexander, they took her. They took Sophia." The words cut like a knife. Clara explained through sobs. 3 men had cornered them outside the clinic, dragging Sophia into a van. One pressed a note into her hand. "They knew your name," she whispered. "They said you have 24 hours to pay $50,000 or she disappears forever." Cold fury settled into Alexander's bones. He knew it was never just about money, It was control, cruelty, power, yet he had no choice but to follow. That evening, he withdrew the funds, each euro a hollow weight. At midnight, a call came from an unlisted number. The bearded man's voice oozed through the receiver. "We have her. If you want her alive, bring 100,000 to the docks in Barcelona." Alone, Clara begged him, "Call the police, Alexander, please, let them handle it," but he shook his head, his eyes dark with determination. "If we involve them, they'll vanish with her. I can't take that risk." For the first time in years, he felt powerless, stripped of the armor his fortune usually provided, yet beneath that helplessness surged something fiercer: determination. Resolve. He would not let them win. That night, under the cover of darkness, Alexander drove toward Barcelona. The city lights faded into the distance, replaced by rusting warehouses, and the salt-sharp air of the port. His duffel bag, heavy with cash, lay on the seat beside him. The battle for Sophia had begun. The Barcelona docks were silent, the sea air heavy with salt and oil. Rusting containers loomed like silent sentinels, shadows stretching long beneath flickering lamps. Alexander Carter stepped from his car, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, each footstep echoing against the cracked pavement. He had faced boardrooms filled with rivals and negotiations worth millions, but nothing had prepared him for this. Tonight, he wasn't a millionaire single dad with influence. He was simply a father determined to bring Sophia home. Inside a decaying warehouse, a single bulb cast harsh light across the concrete floor, and there she was. Sophia sat tied to a chair, her face pale, cheeks streaked with dried tears. But when her eyes lifted and met his, something sparked. "Miss Alexander," she whispered, relief flooding her voice. "Let her go," he demanded, his voice steady though his fists clenched tight around the strap of the bag. From the shadows the bearded man emerged, flanked by his accomplices. His smile was cruel, his eyes glittering with greed. "Do you have it?" Alexander tossed the bag forward. 80,000, the rest when she's safe." The man laughed, a low and menacing sound. "Do you think we bargain with lives, Carter? The girl is worth more than money. She'll fetch a higher price elsewhere if you don't meet our demands." The words twisted like knives. Alexander took a step forward, but before he could speak, Sophia's voice cut through the tension. "You can't sell me," she said, her tone surprisingly calm for a child. The men froze. "Because I know who you are," she continued, her gaze sharp. "I heard you talking. Your name is Mark Riley. You live on Blossom Lane. You have a daughter at St. Francis School." Riley's face paled, rage flickering in his eyes. "And you," she said, turning to another. "John Davis. Your mother is in the hospital in Naples. Do you want her to know what you really do?" The room shifted. Confidence faltered, their power unraveling beneath the precision of a child's memory. Even Alexander stood stunned by her courage. She had taken the only weapons she had, her eyes, her ears, and wielded them sharper than any blade. In the distance, faint sirens began to wail. Clara Rossi had disobeyed his command, and contacted the authorities after all. Panic rippled through the men.
"This isn't over," Riley snarled, slicing the ropes from Sophia's wrists before bolting toward the rear exit. Alexander rushed forward, scooping Sophia into his arms. She clung to him with desperate strength, her body trembling. "I knew you would come," she whispered against his chest. He held her close, his throat tight. "No one will ever take you from me again." When police arrived minutes later, the warehouse stood empty of kidnappers, but filled with echoes of their escape. Yet Sophia, though shaken, stood tall beside Alexander, her head high. She had faced terror and answered it with courage. That night, as they drove away from Barcelona's port, Sophia leaned against him, drifting into exhausted sleep. Alexander looked out at the endless sea and city lights, a clarity washing over him. This was no longer about obligation. It was about love, about family, about the bond neither money nor fear could sever. Weeks later, the Carter estate no longer echoed with silence. Laughter filled its halls, footsteps pattered across marble, and questions flowed in a child's curious voice. Sophia had changed, not only in appearance, but in spirit. Her cheeks glowed with health, her once weary eyes shining with newfound confidence. With every dream she shared, Alexander felt himself rediscovering life. On the morning of the adoption hearing in Paris, Alexander stood before a mirror, adjusting his tie. His usually steady hands trembled. Today he would not only be a guardian in practice, he would be a father-in-law. Sophia appeared in the doorway, twirling in a pale blue dress she had once only dared to admire in a shop window. "Do I look all right?" she asked, spinning so the skirt flared around her knees. "You look perfect," Alexander said, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Absolutely perfect." In the courthouse, Sophia's voice rang clear when the judge asked where she wanted to live. "With Mr. Alexander, with my dad." The word hung in the air, fragile yet powerful. Alexander's vision blurred, tears slipping freely. The adoption was finalized within the hour. The papers, heavier than any contract he had ever signed, were not business. They were belonging. Even Evelyn, his once disapproving sister, was moved. She had railed against scandal, but as she watched her brother's transformation, she bent down and embraced Sophia. "You're a family now," she whispered, and for the first time she meant it. Back in Monaco, the mansion softened into a home. Books lay scattered on tables, drawings taped to the refrigerator, a soccer ball resting in the garden. Alexander no longer shut himself in his study for endless hours. He walked Sophia to school, sat beside her while she worked on homework, and listened, truly listened to her stories. But his vision didn't stop at their home. He could not ignore the truth Sophia had forced him to see. There were countless other children still wandering streets, still searching for shelter, and so he founded Sophia's Haven, a network of shelters across Europe, offering warmth, education, and dignity. The first opened in Naples, not far from where Sophia had once fled, an orphanage that failed her. At the inauguration, Sophia stood proudly at his side, her hand wrapped around his. "We're helping them, aren't we?" she whispered. "Yes," Alexander said, his voice steady. "Because you showed me how." Evenings became sacred. Sometimes they sat in the garden watching the Mediterranean sky burn orange. Sophia nestled against his side. Sometimes Clara joined them, her friendship with Alexander growing deeper as she witnessed the bond between father and daughter. One evening, Sophia tugged his hand and led him to a small corner of the garden. There stood a simple wooden structure, a doghouse, rebuilt with fresh wood and painted white. Around it bloomed flowers she had planted herself. A plaque read, "For every child still searching for a home, and for those who have found one." Alexander knelt beside her, his arm around her shoulders. "You once asked me for a doghouse," he said softly. Sophia's eyes shone. "But you gave me a home." "No," he whispered, voice breaking. "You gave me one. You gave me family." As the sun sank and stars pierced the sky, Alexander realized the storm that had once driven Sophia to his doorstep was not a curse, but a gift. It had shattered his solitude, replacing it with love. The Carter estate was no longer the mansion of a solitary millionaire. It was the home of a father and his daughter, a place where laughter echoed louder than silence, and where a simple plea, "Can I stay?" had blossomed into a legacy of compassion. Sophia and Alexander remind us that family is not defined only by blood, but by the people who choose to stand together when life offers no guarantees. They remind us that real courage isn't always about dramatic gestures. It can be the quiet decision to open a door, to protect and to love, even when it feels difficult. And they remind us that what may first appear as a burden can, in truth, be the greatest gift we could ever receive. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear which part resonated with you most. Share your thoughts below, because your voice truly matters here. And if you'd like to continue hearing stories that inspire, uplift and remind us of our shared humanity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep creating powerful stories like this one, and together we can spread messages of love and hope even further.